to where we left off at chapter 6. You stand at the table, shuffling papers, and you drop something. Only you don't know it. It takes a second or two before you know it, and even then, you know it only as a formless distortion of the teeming space around your body. But once you know you've dropped something, you hear it hit the floor, bleatedly. LOL. Belatedly. The sound makes its way through an immense web of distances. You hear things fall and know what it is at the same time, more or less, and it's a paperclip. You know this from the sound it makes when it hits the floor and from the retrieved memory of the drop itself, the thing falling from your hand or slipping off the edge of the page to which it was clipped. It slipped off the edge of the page. Now that you know you dropped it, you remember how it happened, or half remember, or sort of see it, maybe, or something else. The paperclip hits the floor with an end-to-end bounce, faint and weightless. A sound for which there is no imitative word. The sound of a paperclip falling. But when you bend to pick it up, it isn't there. That night, she stood outside his room and listened to him whimper. The sound was a series of weak cries, half cries, dull and uniform. And it had a faint echo, a feedback, and carried a desolation that swept aside words, hers or anyone's. She didn't know what it meant. Of course she knew. He had no protective surface. He was alone and unable to improvise, make himself up. She went to the bed and sat there, offering touches and calming sounds, softenings of the night. He was scared. How simple and true. She tried to tend him, numb him to his fear. He was here in the howl of the world. This was the howling face, the stark, the not as if of things. But how could she know this? She could not. Maybe he was just deranged. Unroutinely nuts. Not that it's ever routine. A nutcase who tries to live in other voices. He lay curled in a thin blanket. She uncovered him and lay on top. You are supposed to offer solace. She kissed his face and neck and rubbed him warm. She put her hand in his shorts and began to breathe with him, to lead him in little breathy moans. This is what you do when they are scared. She thought she saw a bird out of the corner of her eye. She saw something rise past the window, eerie and bird-like, but maybe not a bird. She looked, and it was a bird, its flight line perfectly vertical, its streaked brown body horizontal, wings calmly stroking. A sparrow, not wind hovering, but generating lift and then instantly gone. She saw it mostly in retrospect, because she didn't know what she was seeing at first and had to recreate the ghostly moment. Write it like a line in a piece of fiction. And maybe it wasn't a sparrow at all, but a smaller bird, gray and not brown, and spotted and not streaked, but not as small as a hummingbird, and how would she ever know for sure unless it happened again? And even then, she thought, and even then, again. It isn't true because it can't be true. Ray is not alive in this man's consciousness, or in his palpable verb tense, his walking, talking continuum. Nice word. What does it mean? She thought it meant a continuous thing, a continuous whole, and the only way to distinguish one part from another, this from that, now from then, is by making arbitrary divisions. This is exactly what he doesn't know how to do. She was working her body, crouched on the cold floor, smelling herself. But it can't be true that he drifts from one reality to another, independent of the logic of time. This is not possible. You are made out of time. This is the force that tells you who you are. Close your eyes and feel it. It is time that defines your existence. But this is the point, that he laps and seeps somehow into other reaches of being, other time lives. And this is an aspect of his bewilderment and pain. Somehow, the weakest word in the language, and more or less, and maybe, always maybe, she was always maybeing. She knelt, body upright and rigid, legs at hip distance, head back, arms back, pelvis pushed forward. Let arms drop down. Dangle right hand over right foot, and then left over left. Everything flows backward from the pelvis. Place palms on soles, matching hands to feet. Time is the only narrative that matters. It stretches events and makes it possible for us to suffer and come out of it, and see death happen and come out of it. But not for him. He is in another structure, another culture, where time is something like itself, sheer and bare, empty of shelter. Hold position. Everything flows from the pelvis backward to the chest and shoulders and arms, to the furious flung back head. Hold position. Breathe normally, then abnormally. Repeat. The wind started blowing at noon and was still shaking the windows when she walked along the halls 5 hours later. The phone was ringing. In the kitchen, he dropped a glass of water, and she extended an arm, seeing the speckled wet began to spread on the plank floor. The shrill wind made her uneasy, turning her inward, worse in a way than obliterating snow or deposits of ice that bring down power lines. She built a fire and then walked out of the room and up the stairs, listening to the walls take the wheezy strain. In the kitchen, she said, "Don't touch it." The best things in this house were the plank floor in the kitchen and the oak balustrade on the staircase. Just saying the words, thinking the words. She said, "Don't touch it," and extended an arm, held out a hand to forestall any effort he might make to pick up the pieces. "I'll clean it up later." There's something about the wind that strips you of assurances, working into you, continuous, making you feel the hidden thinness of everything around you, all the solid stuff of 100 undertakings, the barest makeshift flimsy. She cleaned it up now. She didn't wait for later. There was something in the moment that she needed to keep. She picked up the ringing phone, and it was Ray's lawyer at the other end. Something about debts. He was in heavy debt. There were obligations and liabilities. He had debts cascading on other debts. This made her feel good. It was Ray, all right. She felt a rush of affection, even as the news made her think of her own dimming finances. It was the Ray she knew, and not some other. She was sure he hadn't been aware of the situation. Or had considered it so integral to the condition of his life that knowing about it was just another form of not knowing about it. It occupied no more consciousness than a soft cough on a summer's day. There were loans, outstanding, accounts in arrears, and taxes long overdue. The man recited numbers in a voice that had a government patent. He pointed out the implications, the sinister transits of spousal responsibility. She laughed gaily and wished him luck. Then he stopped eating. She sat him down at the table and fed him by hand. She urged and teased. He took some food, then less. She tried force-feeding him, but he rejected most of it passively, head averted, or took it in and let it dribble out, let it dangle or spew. She began to eat less herself. She looked at him and didn't want to eat. He ate next to nothing for 3 days running, and she ate little more. It was suitable in a way. It was what she hadn't thought of on her own. She looked at him, poor bastard. She watched him with all the intensity of the first moments and hours. But there was something in her look that felt different now. A deathly devotion almost. Sometimes she followed him through the house. She watched him sleep. Mornings on tape, the questions and answers, little lessons and memorizations. All this faded into a daze of stray talk, and then more or less agreed upon silence. She fed him soup while he sat on the toilet once. The days were toneless and droning. Finally, she got in the car and began to drive the back roads, the fire roads, all the places no one goes. And she left the car and walked through fields to the highest point, the knoll or slope, and scanned the area with her hands cupping her face, looking for Mr. Tuttle. From a long way off, what would he look like? Walking the way he walked, narrowly in curved space, like someone you could easily miss, like someone you technically see, but don't quite register in the usual interpretive way, like a man anonymous to himself, like someone you see and then forget you see, like that, instantly. She hadn't been able to find binoculars in the house, and what was the point anyway? He wasn't anywhere out here. But she scanned for hours from different sites, hands at her temples to block the glare. How could such a surplus of vulnerability find itself alone in the world? Because it is made that way. Because it is vulnerable. Because it is alone. Or you see him upside down, the way the eye sees before the mind intervenes. She drove back to the house and walked all through it, room to room, one more time. She thought she'd climb the stairs and walk along the hall and go up to the third floor and find him in the small bedroom off the large empty room at the far end of the hall as she had the first time, sitting on the edge of the bed in his underwear. But when he wasn't there, she knew he wouldn't be, if that makes sense. A few strides before she reached the doorway, she knew he wouldn't be, and then he wasn't. She'd known it all along. She was left to wander the halls, missing him. He was gone so completely there was nothing left, not a single clinging breath of presence. But even as the rooms went empty around her, she felt something in her body try to hold him there. She began to call the institutions, mindful of the irony, and she listened to recorded voices and poked option buttons and sometimes spoke to someone in a made-up voice of middling concern. She gave herself 2 days to do this. On the afternoon of the second day, she spoke to a director of psychiatric services at a small hospital about an hour south, and he told her that a man who roughly matched the general description she'd provided had been admitted, pending tests, the day before. She did not press for details. She wanted to believe this was him, being cared for and fed, clean and safe and medicated, Free, finally, not to suffer. But why should it be him? He wasn't mental. Why did she think of calling mental hospitals in the first place, just after she had discovered him? He didn't act crazy, only impaired in matters of articulation and comprehension. Why did she ever think there was something psychotic about him, except in the sense that people who threaten our assumptions are always believed to be mad? But then it could be him. She had a thing stuck in her mouth, an edged implement, smallish, plastic, and she pressed it to the back of her tongue and scraped whatever debris might be massed there. A slurry of food, mucus, and bacteria. This was not a defense against the natural works of the body. This was what she did. She calculated all the possible requirements. Then she exceeded them. She shattered their practicality. This is what had to be done. It was necessary to alter the visible form all the way down to the tongue. She was suppressing something, closing off outlets to the self, all the way down to the scourings at the deep end of the tongue, concealed from human view. The mind willed it on the body. It was necessary because she needed to do it. This is what made it necessary. His future is not under construction. It is already there, susceptible to entry. She had it on tape. She did not want to believe this was the case. It was her future too. It is her future too. She played the tape 12 times. It means your life and death are set in place, just waiting for you to keep the appointments. She listened to him say, "Don't touch it. I'll clean it up later. It is the thing you know nothing about." Then she said it herself some days later. He had been in there with her. It was her future, not his. How much myth do we build into our experience of time? "Don't touch it," she said. He'd known this was going to happen. These were the words she would say. He'd been in there with her. "I'll clean it up later." She wanted to create her future, not enter a state already shaped to her outline. Something is happening. It has happened. It will happen. This is what she believed. There is a story, a flow of consciousness and possibility. The future comes into being, but not for him. He hasn't learned the language. There has to be an imaginary point, a non-place where language intersects with our perceptions of time and space, and he is a stranger at this crossing, without words or bearings. But what did she know? Nothing. This is the rule of time. It is the thing you know nothing about. She listened to him say it on the tape, in a voice that was probably hers. But she could have made it up, much of it. Not from scratch, but in retrospect and memory. But she had it on tape, and it was him, and he was saying it. Then she said it to herself. But so what? So what if she said the same thing in the same words? It means nothing. People saying the same thing. She had him on tape, saying it. But she might easily have misremembered what she herself said when he dropped the water glass. Might have been different. Slightly, very, moderately different. But so what if it's the same? Past, present, and future are not amenities of language. Time unfolds into the seams of being. It passes through you, making and shaping. But not if you are him. This is a man who remembers the future. Don't touch it. I'll clean it up later. But if you examine the matter methodically, be smart, she thought, and analyze coldly. Break it down and scrutinize. If you examine the matter methodically, you realize that he is a retarded man, sadly gifted in certain specialized areas, such as memory retention and mimicry. A man who'd been concealed in a large house, listening. Nothing else makes sense. It is the thing no one understands, but it makes and shapes you. And in these nights, since he had left, she sometimes sat with a book in her lap, eyes closed, and felt him living somewhere in the dark. And it is colder where he is. It is wintrier there, and she wanted to take him in, try to know him in the spaces where his chaos lurks, in all the soft cornered rooms and unraveling verbs, the parts of speech where he is meant to locate his existence, and in the material place where Ray lives in him, alive again, word for word, touch for touch. And she opened and closed her eyes, and thought in a blink, the world had changed. He violates the limits of the human. For a while, she stopped answering the phone, as she'd done intermittently since the first days back. And when she began to pick it up again, she used another voice. Her eyes had to adjust to the night sky. She walked away from the house, out of the spill of electric light, and the sky grew deeper. She watched for a long time, and it began to spread and melt and go deeper still, developing strata and magnitudes and light years in numbers so unapproachable that someone had to invent idiot names to represent the arrays of ones and zeros and powers and dominations, because only the bedtime language of childhood can save us from awe and shame. At first, the voice she used on the telephone was nobody's, a generic, neutered human. But then, she started using his. It was his voice, a dry, piping sound, hollow-bodied, like a bird humming on her tongue.